So, guys, last week I watched The Deer Hunter down at the Metrograph in New York City, and I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the themes of The Deer Hunter. And as a lot of people say, that when you watch this movie, this is a movie that you should really, really watch a bunch of different times, just to kind of understand all the symbolism within it. And it's obviously, and I think one of the weaknesses of the film is that it's so intense that really it wouldn't be a film that people would want to watch over and over unless you're really into film analysis. But otherwise, it's a very tough movie to watch because of its vicious depiction of war and suicide. So, there's a lot of things I want to talk about. Um, First of all, The Deer Hunter. One of the things I want to say first is that, why did Michael Cimino and the writers decide to make them Russian immigrants? And my answer is this, is that, Russian immigrants are stereotyped as communist. And what that means is that, to me, that means that because they can be assumed as communists, that their contributions in the Vietnam War don't mean a lot to other people, because people will say, we'll be like, okay, well, even though you guys served in the Vietnam War, we're more concerned about you guys being Russian, so maybe you guys are communists. So it's obviously almost like saying that whatever contributions they've done are more undervalued just because they're Russian immigrants. It would be the same thing if during the Iraq War, there was during the Iraq War, after September 11th, there was a bunch of Arab soldiers. A lot of people wouldn't really talk about that or even show that in the news because they'll be like, okay, that's just a little too juxtaposing. So, I just think that I'm right about that, where, they were probably made to be Russian soldiers for the reason mainly to just illustrate the point that, their contributions are never going to be looked at as significant to other people, therefore adding more to the tragedy and the heartbreak of the story. And I kind of say, like, the steel mill, the bar, and them hunting, these are all like symbols of masculinity because, in the olden days, you couldn't work in the steel mill if you were a woman. Maybe if there was a secretary job, but you could not, be, pounding iron and doing other things with the guys because that was like people have that stereotype that that's for the men and the women need to be home and doing the cooking or working in grocery stores. So but then obviously the idea of people working with metal, people working with fire. So it's kind of like, as I said, it fits to the idea of the male. And then obviously the bar, the bar is where a lot of men congregate. And, you watch shows like The Simpsons where the bar is really the place where the men congregate. And then also with the hunting, the same thing. It's where the men congregate. And, were there women that were hunters? Absolutely. But all those are just a sign with masculinity. I even said toxic masculinity because I do think that also their choice to go to the Vietnam War was also just because they had these stereotypes about what war is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this wonderful epic like an old John Wayne movie or an old war film from the 40s where you go there and it's kind of glorious and you're doing a great thing. Or even I think the Ballad of Gunga Din is a movie from 1939. It lost best cinematography to Gone with the Wind, but even in that film, it was the same idea. There's good guys, there's bad guys, and usually the good guys and everybody on the good guy's side will always prevail. There's no death on the good guy's side. So I think that when I see these symbols, it also makes me think of toxic masculinity and their belief system and their culture system of just saying that, we're men, we're going to do what men do, and ultimately not see the other side of that, which is that you can kind of associate yourself with other manly things like going to war, playing Russian roulette, valuing or disvaluing or taking risks with your life, which, are things that, that people do, and it's unfortunate. Obviously with war, there wasn't a lot of education about how fucked up it is back in the 70s until really people saw images of the Vietnam War on their television screen. But there was a lot of people that still had that, stereotype that, that war was just all your buddies surviving and and the evildoers just being annihilated. The killing of the deer. A lot of people do talk about that scene, the Deer Hunter, where Robert De Niro's character kills a deer in the beginning, and then at the end, he misses it. And a lot of people say that really, if you look at it chronologically, it's just showing that two things: that obviously being through war and being through trauma, it's affecting him psychologically. He's not the same type of hunter. And then the other thing that people say is that actually the deer symbolizes death, because it's like in the beginning he just shoots the deer and he's like, he doesn't think about it, but at the end he kind of knows that it's not just he's seen so much death and people being killed, so it's like, well, now I understand that an animal and also living people can easily die at any time. So he understands mortality, but also that he's a giver and taker of life. The other thing about the deer is that deers represent innocence, being in touch with natures, and then also then when he kills the deer in the beginning of the film, it's almost like saying that he's losing his innocence, and then he's also losing peace, and the peace being that 2 scenes later he's in a bar playing piano, and then he's in the Vietnam War. So it could be a metaphor, a foreshadowing metaphor, like once he kills the deer, therefore violence is going to come into his life. When he kills the deer and he goes to the Vietnam War, there's a sense of, okay, well, now your innocence is lost, because now you're going to understand like what real killing is. And then the other thing too is that the deer that he kills in the beginning of the movie has big horns, so there's a sense of horns being associated with a large penis, like a phallus. So it's a sense of masculinity, like killing a deer it makes you a man. So it's almost like maybe he's also a hunter to kind of prove himself as like this manly man. The other thing is that Russian roulette in this movie, I think that it's a metaphor for how governments profit off of war. So it's like, like especially in the ending scene where you see the 2 main characters play Russian roulette, even though they're getting some cut of the money, all the other people around them could be a metaphor for the House of Representatives or Congress or Parliament or other governments. So it's almost like it doesn't matter what the soldiers are doing. If one lives or one dies, if they're on your side, the American side, the Saigon side, it doesn't matter, because in the end of the day, the people who are constructing this problem, they're making the most money. And just like what you saw at the end of the Deer Hunter, when somebody dies, more people are concerned about 2 things, which is throwing the body on the pile and walking away, and then the other thing is also who's owed money after that. So they're not even concerned about the loss of human life. Life goes on. And a lot of people say, like on YouTube, that's kind of one of the most disturbing thing about the movie, is that how these people can watch somebody play Russian roulette lose, and they can care less, and they can kind of care less, and then they see the same thing again and again. And even in the beginning of the film, you saw like Christopher Walken's character go to the Russian roulette scene, and then you see Robert De Niro do it. So obviously they have some sense of outrage, and also there's a sense of just enjoying what they're seeing, because some people like watching a train wreck happen. And then the last thing I want to say is that Robert De Niro plays a character named Michael, and there's many times in the movie that people assume that he's gay because he's not good at picking up women, and he also goes streaking, and I'm not sure, but it was him or another character just listens to music and he kisses a guy on the cheek, and the person calls him a faggot. I'm not sure if that's Michael or whoever, but it kind of adds to. And then later on, Michael's character, he sleeps with Meryl Streep's character, even though Meryl Streep's character is waiting for Christopher Walken's character Nick to come home. So I haven't seen this in the movie Midnight Cowboy where it feeds into toxic masculinity. Maybe he's sleeping with her because he wants to prove that he's a man. Prove to everybody that his sexuality is that he is a man. And then the other thing too is that it comes off as like maybe he's going to war, maybe he's showing off his hunting abilities, maybe he kind of teaches people in the art of hunting or what good signs are, and like he drinks and he's also working a steel mill and he's going around in his outfit. There's a sense of maybe he has some insecurities and maybe he's trying to show off, I'm a man because I'm doing all these manly things. And I think that's also kind of true of the movie. I think that it really can be dissected as a piece of the consequences of toxic masculinity and all that stuff, and also just what it means to be a man, especially through the Vietnam War and all that. So, like The Deer Hunter has a lot of talking points. It is a very, very complex film. Definitely underrated. Then the other thing I will say is that even though there's metaphors and symbolism and creative choices made in the movie, I think that Michael Cimino, and people do say this about him, that when he made Heaven's Gate, the film after that, he did a very horrible job with it. And one of the things was that he was given so much freedom, but in The Deer Hunter, he was not given as much freedom. So I think that even with the creative choices he's made, he was working in a group of people. So there was a lot of senses of maybe people saying, okay, well, this doesn't work, and we're not going to let you have your way because we also have voices too. So I think that there was a lot of things that were kept in the film that worked, and a lot of things that were not kept in the film that did not work. And I also will say that because of that, I think that what they kept in the film, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of deepness to it to make sure that even if it's symbolism or metaphors or foreshadowing or whatever, it was all done in a way that that works for the movie. Because there's a lot of movies that become pretentious. Like, people were talking about the film Maryland that came out in 2022 and how there's a lot of scenes that go on for too long. There's a lot of changes in aspect ratio, and there's a lot of other like creative licenses. You could kind of dissect them and say maybe it means this or that. But then there are films like The Deer Hunter or a lot of Stanley Kubrick movies where it's not to be pretentious. Whatever's in there works for the movie to make sure it works. But I do think that there's a lot of video essays anybody could do. I'd love to do a video essay about toxic masculinity in The Deer Hunter. And but otherwise, it's a very amazing movie, and everybody should definitely watch it. It's definitely probably the greatest war film ever made, the greatest American war film ever made. Like, Apocalypse Now is kind of like really like dreamy and psychological, but this one is more based in reality and more understandable. War causing trauma leading to issues versus in Apocalypse Now, where it's almost like you're getting into mind of mentally disturbed people, first person, so you kind of get a little like lost within it. The realism in this film, surpasses the realism in Apocalypse Now. There's a lot of talking points about the metaphors, themes, and symbols in The Deer Hunter. And anybody who wants to make a video about The Deer Hunter, go ahead and do it. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this amazing, amazing movie.